April 1943. The air over northern France belongs entirely to the Luftwaffe. German fighter pilots operating in this sector are battle-hardened professionals who have survived the unforgiving skies over Britain, North Africa, and the Eastern Front. They understand the absolute mathematics of aerial combat. They know that a successful fighter aircraft must be light, it must be nimble, and it must possess a wing loading that allows it to turn inside the radius of its opponent. This is not merely their personal opinion. It is the ruling doctrine of aviation engineering across the globe. The Messerschmitt 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190 are physical embodiments of this precise philosophy. The Focke-Wulf is particularly lethal. It is a masterpiece of compact, aggressive aerodynamic design. Its pilots know that as long as they adhere to the fundamental laws of energy and weight, they cannot be touched by Allied fighters. Then the intelligence reports arrive from the Channel Coast. The United States Army Air Forces have deployed a new pursuit aircraft to airfields in Britain. The documents list the new enemy fighters' specifications. German intelligence officers read the figures and assume there has been a severe translation error. The numbers describe an aerodynamic impossibility. The reported weight of the American aircraft is completely beyond comprehension. 14,000 pounds, fully loaded. 7 tons of metal, fuel, and ammunition. It is twice the weight of a standard Messerschmitt interceptor. It is heavier than several twin-engine medium bombers currently in service. A joke begins circulating rapidly through the German fighter wings. It suggests that if an American pilot is engaged in combat, he can take evasive action simply by unbuckling his harness and running around the inside of his own fuselage. The laughter echoing in the German mess halls is completely justified. By every known metric of aerial warfare, a 7-ton fighter is a flying coffin. It should be sluggish, blind, and unable to climb or turn. The German confidence is not rooted in arrogance. It is rooted in the unyielding laws of physics. You cannot strap a human pilot to a massive steel anvil and expect him to outmaneuver the finest interceptors in Europe. What the Luftwaffe does not yet understand is that the Americans are not trying to win a turning fight. The Americans have looked at the physics of aerial combat and decided to rewrite the equations entirely. 3,000 miles away in Farmingdale, New York, the Republic Aviation Corporation has been solving a completely different problem. The design team, led by Alexander Kartveli, is not interested in building a delicate dancing aircraft. They are interested in building a high-altitude weapons platform that can carry the largest, most powerful aircraft engine ever developed in the United States. They are building an aircraft around a power plant, rather than fitting a power plant into an aircraft. The engine is the Pratt & Whitney Double Wasp. It is a massive 18-cylinder radial beast capable of generating 2,000 horsepower. It requires an incredibly sturdy airframe simply to contain its immense rotational torque, but raw horsepower loses its effectiveness as the air thins at high altitude. To successfully escort heavy bombers into Germany, the new fighter must perform flawlessly at 30,000 feet, where the atmosphere is desperately thin. The American solution is an engineering marvel called a turbo supercharger. It captures boiling exhaust gases and uses them to force highly compressed, oxygen-rich air directly back into the engine cylinders. This supercharger is roughly the size of a cast-iron bathtub. It cannot possibly fit in the nose of the aircraft. It must be mounted far back in the rear fuselage, requiring yards of thick ductwork running directly beneath the pilot. This internal plumbing forces the aircraft to expand outward. The fuselage swells into a massive, deep-bellied shape. The resulting profile earns the aircraft its permanent and affectionate nickname. The American pilots call it the Jube. The Thunderbolt does not look like a weapon of aerial dueling. It looks like a piece of heavy industrial machinery with wings attached as an afterthought. It violates every aesthetic rule of European fighter design, but the immense size of the airframe creates a unique tactical opportunity. The massive wings can support physical weight that would instantly rip the wings off a lighter European fighter. The engineers at Republic take full advantage of this structural abundance. They do not install 2 machine guns. They do not install 4. They mount 8 50 caliber Browning heavy machine guns, embedding 4 deeply into the thick metal of each wing. This is not standard fighter armament. This is a level of forward-firing destruction that most nations reserve for heavy bombers or naval patrol vessels. And Republic provides the staggering ammunition supply to match, 4 25 rounds per gun. 3,400 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition in total. The metallic belts are so heavy that ground crews struggle to lift them into the wing bays. The industrial capacity required to manufacture these components is difficult to visualize. While Germany meticulously machines individual parts for its interceptors, American factories are preparing to flood the sky with raw, overwhelming tonnage. The production lines run continuously, day and night. The metal presses stamp out aluminum bulkheads by the thousands. The Pratt & Whitney plants deliver the massive radial engines in endless railway shipments. The speed of assembly accelerates until Republic Aviation is turning out one complete Thunderbolt every 60 minutes. A fully armed, 7-ton warplane is born every hour of every day. The first squadrons arrive in England in early 1943. The American pilots are initially intimidated by the sheer imposing bulk of the aircraft they have been ordered to fly into combat. When parked next to the sleek, elegant Royal Air Force Spitfires, the Thunderbolt looks entirely absurd. British pilots politely suggest that the Americans have brought a heavy bomber to do a fighter pilot's job. The first combat missions over occupied Europe seem to confirm the skeptics. The massive Thunderbolt accelerates slowly. In a low-altitude turning fight, the Focke-Wulf easily slips inside the American aircraft's wide turning radius. German pilots report back to their airfields with satisfied smiles. The giant American fighter is exactly what they predicted. It is heavy, it is cumbersome, and it cannot turn with a proper interceptor. But the American pilots are actively learning. They realize that trying to fight a Focke-Wulf on European terms is a fatal mistake. They must fight the German aircraft on exclusively American terms. Those terms are high altitude, superior energy, and overwhelming mass. The Thunderbolt was specifically designed to breathe easily at 30,000 feet. The Focke-Wulf engine begins to gasp and lose power above 20,000. The Americans adopt a radically new tactic. They stay high, flying top cover miles above the heavy bomber streams. They let the turbo superchargers feed their engines while the German interceptors struggle up from below. When the German fighters finally appear, the Thunderbolts do not attempt to turn with them. Instead, the American pilots push their control sticks forward and let gravity take firm hold of 7 tons of steel. The result is a violent revelation. The perceived weakness of the Thunderbolt instantly becomes its greatest aerodynamic weapon. The sheer mass of the aircraft translates into a diving speed that defies European belief. The Focke-Wulf pilots look in their rearview mirrors and see the massive American fighters falling from the sky like dropped anvils. The acceleration of the dive is completely terrifying. The Thunderbolt can easily exceed 500 miles per hour in a vertical plunge. It accelerates so rapidly that the immense aerodynamic forces threaten to lock the control surfaces solid. A German pilot in a Focke-Wulf attempts his standard defensive maneuver. He aggressively rolls his nimble aircraft over and dives, expecting to easily outrun the heavy American pursuer. He checks his mirror again. The American is not just following him. The American is closing the distance with the unstoppable momentum of a runaway freight train. The German pushes his throttle forward to the firewall. His engine screams in protest. His airframe shudders near its absolute structural limit. He is diving as fast as his perfectly engineered interceptor can possibly fall. The Thunderbolt continues to gain on him effortlessly. The physics of mass and gravity are absolute. The 7-ton juke is catching the lightweight interceptor, and there is nothing the German pilot can do to stop it. This is the precise moment of first contact between German assumption and American reality. The realization that they cannot outdive the heavy American fighter permanently shatters the Luftwaffe's sense of invulnerability. But the high-speed dive is only the delivery mechanism. The true horror of the Thunderbolt is what happens when it finally catches its prey. The 850 caliber machine guns are armed and waiting. At a distance of exactly 300 yards, the American pilot presses the gun switch on his control stick. The electrical solenoids fire, and the massive wings erupt in sustained, blinding flame. 100 heavy bullets per second leave the American aircraft. It is not a mere stream of fire. It is a solid, converging wall of lead, steel, and incendiary compound moving violently through the sky. The explosive recoil of the 8 heavy guns is so severe that it visibly slows the massive Thunderbolt in midair. The American pilot is essentially hitting the brakes with his own forward-firing weaponry. The fleeing Focke-Wulf is struck squarely by this storm of metal. The German aircraft was designed to survive standard machine gun fire. It was never designed to survive an industrial shredding machine. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds easily punched through the German tail assembly. They shattered the canopy glass. They tear through the aluminum skin and detonate deep inside the fuselage fuel tanks. The Focke-Wulf disintegrates instantly. It does not trail smoke and glide gently toward the ground. It simply comes apart in a violent cloud of shattered aluminum and burning aviation fuel. The American pilot smoothly pulls back on his control stick. The immense kinetic energy of the heavy dive carries him effortlessly back up to 25,000 feet. The energy retention of the massive airframe is flawless. He resets his altitude, checks his engine temperature gauges, and calmly scans the sky for the next target. The Juge has not even begun to reach its operational limits. Back at the German airfields, the intelligence officers are forced to rapidly revise their written assessments. The joke about the American pilot running around inside his fuselage is no longer repeated in the mess halls. The frantic reports from surviving German pilots describe a terrifying new reality. They describe an American fighter that drops from the stratosphere, unleashes an impossible volume of fire, and vanishes back into the blinding sun. The Luftwaffe commanders realize with mounting dread that their entire tactical manual is suddenly obsolete. The tight-turning fights they perfected are completely useless against an enemy who simply refuses to turn. The legendary German ace Günther Rau, a man who would survive the war with 275 confirmed victories, later describes the unique terror of facing the Thunderbolt. He states plainly that the German pilots were never afraid of being outflown. They were afraid of the Thunderbolts diving entirely through their defensive formations with those 850 caliber machine guns tearing the sky apart. The realization deepens when German pilots attempt to shoot the Thunderbolt down. They discover that the aircraft they dismissed as a flying bathtub is structurally incomprehensible. On June 26, 1943, an American pilot named Robert Johnson finds himself separated from his squadron. His lone Thunderbolt is intercepted by a group of Focke-Wulf fighters. A 20mm cannon shell explodes violently inside his cockpit. His hydraulic system is severed. His heavy canopy is jammed shut. Flammable fluid sprays across his windshield, partially blinding him. A German fighter pulls in precisely behind the crippled Thunderbolt. The German pilot aims at the massive silhouette and opens fire with his heavy machine guns, expecting an easy victory. The rounds strike the Republic fighter repeatedly. They puncture the fuselage. They shatter the tail surfaces. They strike the thick armor plating behind the American pilot's seat with the loud sound of a sledgehammer striking an anvil. But the Thunderbolt does not fall. The massive radial engine absorbs bullet after bullet into its thick metal cylinder banks, and it simply continues to run. The German pilot slides his Focke-Wulf closer. He is flying so near that Johnson can clearly see his face. The German opens fire again, emptying his remaining ammunition into the American aircraft. Hundreds of heavy rounds tear into the metal skin. The American fighter is rapidly reduced to a flying piece of perforated scrap iron. By every known law of aviation, it should be a spiraling fireball. It continues to fly straight and level. The radial engine, entirely lacking a vulnerable liquid cooling system, simply chews through the catastrophic damage and keeps turning the heavy propeller. The German pilot stops firing. His ammunition bays are completely empty. He flies alongside the shattered American fighter for a long moment, staring at it in absolute, paralyzing disbelief. He realizes he is looking at something his own military culture cannot produce. He is looking at an aircraft built with such an arrogant excess of material strength that it can simply ignore destruction. The German pilot slowly shakes his head, raises his gloved hand in a deliberate salute to the American, and peels away. Johnson flies his pulverized Thunderbolt back to England and lands safely. When the sun set, ground crews examined Johnson's aircraft. They stopped counting the bullet holes after reaching 200. The structural integrity of the Juge has completely invalidated German offensive doctrine. If your family has a story connected to what happened in this sector, or a grandfather who maintained these massive radial engines, those accounts belong in the historical record. Share them below. The impossible encounters multiply across the European theater. German pilots report emptying their entire ammunition reserves into a single Thunderbolt, only to watch it fly steadily away over the English Channel. The psychological toll on the Luftwaffe is profound. They are flying delicate precision instruments. They are fighting an enemy flying a bank vault armed with 8 heavy machine guns. The strategic calculation shifts dramatically. The American bomber formations are no longer unprotected prey. The heavy escorts are butchering the German interceptor squadrons long before they can even reach the bombers. The Focke-Wulfs are routinely forced to dive away from combat, abandoning their critical interception missions. The skies over Germany are slowly being pried from the Luftwaffe's desperate hands, but the true nightmare for the German military is yet to come. The Thunderbolt has proven it can dominate the high altitudes. Now, the Americans are about to bring it down to the earth. As the massive invasion of Europe approaches, the United States Army Air Forces realize they have inadvertently created the greatest ground attack aircraft in the history of mechanized warfare. The very qualities that make the Thunderbolt a formidable high-altitude escort also make it a devastating low-level hunter. Its heavy armor protects the pilot from small arms ground fire. Its massive engine shrubs off shrapnel, and its wings are so incredibly strong they can carry an external payload that rivals a dedicated medium bomber. The engineers begin hanging high-explosive bombs and unguided rockets directly beneath the thick wings. The Thunderbolt is transformed into the Jabot, the terrified German slang for fighter bomber. It quickly becomes the undisputed apex predator of the French countryside. The German army relies on an intricate, sprawling logistical network of trains, supply trucks, and horse-drawn wagons. They operate on the assumption that they can move vital reinforcements to the front lines when needed. The Thunderbolts arrive at treetop level to permanently destroy that assumption. They operate in pairs and flights of 4, roaming the highways and rail lines of occupied Europe with terrifying lethal impunity. A German supply column moves cautiously along a narrow road in Normandy. The drivers suddenly hear the heavy, distinctive, throbbing drone of the Pratt & Whitney engines approaching fast. They have mere seconds to scatter into the muddy ditches. The massive American fighters crest the tree line, already perfectly aligned with the roadway, their 8 machine guns fully engaged. The sheer volume of fire is apocalyptic. 3,400 rounds of heavy ammunition tear through the unarmored trucks, igniting fuel tanks and instantly detonating hidden ammunition supplies. The Thunderbolts do not pull up to avoid the resulting explosions. They fly straight through the violent blast waves, their heavy frames entirely unaffected by the turbulence, and bank heavily around for a second pass. German anti-aircraft gunners open fire frantically with slight flak. They score direct hits on the American planes. They see jagged pieces of metal tear away from the heavy wings. The Thunderbolts completely ignore the damage. They casually drop 500-pound bombs directly onto the flak positions, silencing the defensive guns instantly in a massive cascade of earth and gray smoke. The German logistical network begins to paralyze. Supply trains cannot move during the daylight hours. Locomotive boilers are routinely shattered by 50-caliber armor-piercing rounds. A confident German panzer commander attempts to move his heavy tanks toward the front lines. He firmly believes his thick steel armor will protect him from the aircraft. He is horribly mistaken. The Thunderbolts carry 5-inch high-velocity rockets. A single direct hit from these weapons can crack the heavy armor of a Tiger tank, leaving it a burning ruin on the roadside. The raw industrial reality of the American war machine has descended directly onto the heads of the German army. The enemy dismissal has evolved entirely into raw, paralyzed terror. This marks the absolute end of the enemy's operational confidence. They are no longer calculating how to defeat the American Air Force tactically. They are merely calculating how to survive the afternoon. The United States has brought the relentless factory floor directly to the battlefield, and the mathematics of abundance are about to consume the Third Reich. The summer of 1944. The skies over France are completely swarming with Thunderbolts. The heavy American aircraft have established total unbreakable aerial supremacy over the Normandy beachheads. German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding the desperate defense of France, writes frantic reports to his high command. He describes the absolute impossibility of moving troops or supplies under the constant American air patrols. He notes that his own mobile forces are pinned to the ground, hiding in forests and deep ravines. Any vehicle that attempts to move on an open road is immediately annihilated by the heavy fighters. Rommel himself will soon fall victim to this exact reality. His staff car is spotted and violently strafed by Allied fighters. The man who conquered North Africa is driven off the road and severely wounded. The psychological collapse of the German high command is meticulously documented in their daily situation reports. The language shifts completely from tactical military assessments to expressions of helpless, bitter frustration. They complain constantly that the Americans do not fight according to the traditional, honorable rules of warfare. The Americans do not maneuver gracefully. They simply arrive with overwhelming numbers and obliterate the entire grid square. A German supply officer records his profound despair in his private diary. He calculates his panzer unit's strict fuel requirements. He knows the required fuel exists at a depot exactly 50 miles away, but the distance might as well be on the dark side of the moon. Between his empty tanks and that vital fuel depot are endless relays of Thunderbolts, circling patiently, waiting for anything to emerge from the tree cover. His specific tragedy is the tragedy of the bureaucratic realist. He knows the war is mathematically lost simply by looking at his supply ledger. The American aircraft have completely severed the main arteries of the German army. The sheer undeniable abundance of American ammunition completely breaks the German fighting spirit. German artillery is strictly rationed to a few shells per day. German fighter pilots must conserve every single burst of cannon fire. The American Thunderbolt pilots face absolutely no such restrictions. They are actively encouraged to expend their ammunition freely. If a target presents itself, they hold the trigger down until the target ceases to exist. A German infantryman pinned in a muddy ditch watches in horror as a single Thunderbolt expends hundreds of heavy rounds to destroy an abandoned, horse-drawn wooden cart. The American pilot is simply clearing the road. The young German soldier suddenly realizes the futility of his situation. His entire nation is desperately collecting scrap metal to forge a single rifle, while the Americans are pouring thousands of pounds of industrial steel into a wooden wagon. This is the true, inescapable horror of the arsenal of democracy. It is not just the high quality of the weapons being produced. It is the inescapable, crushing quantity of them arriving every single day. The massive factories in Farmingdale and Evansville are now operating at a blistering pace that defies human comprehension. The production figures themselves are a weapon as devastating as the aircraft they build. By the end of the conflict, Republic Aviation will have built 15,636 Thunderbolts. It remains the most produced American fighter aircraft in the entire history of military aviation. They build them faster than the entire Luftwaffe can shoot them down. Even when German anti-aircraft fire successfully claims an American plane, the replacement aircraft often arrives at the English base before the paperwork is filed. The German ace Adolf Galland, general of the fighter arm, is finally forced to face the juke from the cockpit of Germany's most advanced weapon, the Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter. In April 1945, Galland is flying his revolutionary jet, secure in the knowledge that his twin engines make him far faster than any piston-driven American aircraft in existence. But altitude and geometry remain completely unforgiving. An American pilot named James Finnegan, flying a Thunderbolt, spots the German jet far below him. Finnegan rolls his heavy fighter inverted and pulls through into a steep vertical dive. The 7-ton mass accelerates rapidly. Finnegan pushes the heavy Thunderbolt to an astonishing 550 miles per hour. The massive radial engine and the pull of gravity allow him to easily catch the jet. Finnegan violently squeezes the trigger. The .850 caliber machine guns completely saturate the right engine and wing root of the Messerschmitt. The delicate German jet is shattered by the tremendous impact. Adolf Galland, the legendary commander of the Luftwaffe, is shot down by the very aircraft his own intelligence officers had openly laughed at just 2 years earlier. The heavy, ugly, unmaneuverable flying bathtub has successfully hunted and destroyed the absolute pinnacle of German aviation technology. The technological humiliation is absolute and undeniable. The figures cited here regarding exact production and documented counters come directly from United States Army Air Forces records and German military archive collections. If you have encountered different production numbers in your own research, the source matters. The comments are where this history stays accurate. Share your specific references below. As the bitter war in Europe grinds to a close, the final accounting of the Thunderbolt's tactical impact is compiled. The resulting statistics read exactly like the inventory of a massive natural disaster. Thunderbolt pilots officially claim 30,752 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air. The kill ratio against the vaunted German interceptors stands at a staggering 4.6 to 1, but the impressive aerial victories are merely a fraction of the total destruction. The true measure of the heavy aircraft is found in the blackened wreckage scattered across the entire European landscape. 86,000 railway cars obliterated, 9,000 locomotives completely shattered, 68,000 transport trucks and armored vehicles reduced to burning scrap metal on the roadsides, 3,300 tanks destroyed. The Thunderbolt did not just defeat the German military in combat. It systematically dismantled the physical infrastructure that allowed the German military to exist. The German commanders who survived the war are thoroughly interrogated by Allied intelligence officers. Their documented testimonies are remarkably consistent regarding the terror of the American fighter bombers. They do not speak of American tactical brilliance. They do not speak of individual dogfighting skill. They speak with exhausted reverence about the unstoppable, heavy machinery that constantly blotted out the sun. A captured German general states plainly that the war was lost not on the battlefields of France, but in the sprawling factories of New York and Michigan. The Juge was the flying manifestation of those factories. The engineering marvel of the turbo supercharger allowed the massive engine to breathe. The massive engine allowed the wings to carry unprecedented weight. The wings carried the heavy guns that ultimately broke the Luftwaffe. It was a brilliant chain of industrial logic that the totalitarian mind could not process until it was entirely too late. The Germans built delicate weapons for a duel. The Americans built heavy weapons for an execution. Yet amid this staggering industrial violence, there remains a profound moral clarity. The absolute destruction wrought by the Thunderbolt was directed precisely at the mechanics of European tyranny. The pilots who flew these massive machines were farm boys from Ohio, mechanics from Pennsylvania, and university students from California. They were not raised in a rigid culture of militaristic worship. They were simply given a heavy machine designed to do a specific job, and they did that job with terrifying, relentless efficiency. When the job was finally done, they parked the heavy fighters and went home. The Thunderbolt was never designed as a symbol of imperial aggression. It was a purely utilitarian instrument of liberation, built by a massive democracy that thoroughly understood the mathematics of victory. It was ugly because freedom in a mechanized age required heavy lifting. It was heavy because it carried the thick armor needed to bring its young pilot back alive. Alexander Kartveli did not design an elegant aircraft for the sky. He designed an impenetrable flying shield attached to 8 heavy machine guns powered by a 2,000 horsepower engine. The veteran German pilots laughed out loud at its shape. They laughed at its immense weight. They laughed at the American designers who dared to defy the established laws of aerodynamics. Their laughter ended permanently the moment the first American pilot pushed his control stick forward, let 7 tons of steel fall from 30,000 feet, and pulled the trigger. The sound of those 850 caliber machine guns firing in perfect unison was the sound of a confident, arrogant worldview being torn to shreds by pure industrial reality. The Focke-Wulf was a truly beautiful machine. The Messerschmitt was an absolute triumph of precision engineering. But beauty and engineering cannot survive direct contact with overwhelming material abundance. The Thunderbolt remains the ultimate expression of American military philosophy during the Second World War. Build it exceptionally strong. Build it incredibly heavy. Build thousands of them. The men who flew the Juge knew they were not flying the prettiest aircraft in the European sky, but they knew with absolute certainty they were flying the one that would bring them safely home. They loved the heavy fighter precisely because it absorbed the absolute worst punishment the enemy could deliver and simply kept flying. It was an aircraft that forgave human mistakes through sheer structural mass. Decades later, at quiet reunions across the United States, the surviving pilots would gather to remember the machine that saved their lives. Their enduring gratitude was deeply personal. They remembered the terrifying sound of shrapnel hitting the heavy armor plate. They remembered the deep, vibrating roar of the radial engine refusing to quit even when missing multiple cylinders. The enemy who confidently mocked the flying bathtub learned a brutal lesson that history continues to validate. Never confuse aesthetic elegance with pure industrial lethality. The industrial stories of American democratic achievement are not exhausted by any single account. Each operation, each weapon system, each logistical miracle reveals another dimension of what this country produced when tested at its fullest. The next account is prepared.